Hey everyone, welcome to another Teach Kelvin Your Thing session. In today's session, I'm going to be learning Formkit with Justin. How you doing, Justin?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm grateful for you coming to the session and to TKYT. So before we get started with the what's Formkit and all that geekiness, let's meet Justin. So tell us who you are, what you do, what you've been doing. Any information you're willing to share. We want to hear it.
Sure. So my name is Justin Schroeder. Everybody calls me Schroeder, but technically it's pronounced Schrader. And I've been programming since, I don't know, I think I was 12, 11 or 12 when I first started writing websites back in the late 90s, very early 2000s. So sort of an old soul in that sense. I mean, I was a young kid at the time.
Mhm.
And been basically writing JavaScript and the web ever since then. And so my framework of choice at this current moment is Vue. I'm a really big fan of Vue. I love it, and and so I've built a few different tools in that ecosystem. The first one that like anybody had heard of was called Vue Formulate, and that was a form library for Vue 2. Um, and then in Vue 3, when we decided to start, making the switch, we realized, sort of like Nuxt, honestly, there's an opportunity here to sort of start over and re-examine this from first principles. And so we did that, and the result of that was Formkit. I've got a few other open source projects. One's called Auto Animate, which moves things around in the DOM. Those annoying transitions, in particular, when things are coming into the DOM, leaving the DOM, or moving in the DOM. It sort of automatically smooths those out. And then another one that I'm particularly excited about is called Arrow, and it's basically like a little micro UI framework.
Mhm.
That's me.
Yeah, that's you've been busy. You've been really busy.
Busy,
I
busy, yeah.
yeah, I like it. So I'm I I think JavaScript has been your only language so far, or you've dabbled, or because of course we like to dabble.
Yeah, of course, I've dabbled. I used to write Java a long time
Mhm.
ago. I did some, like even before that, back in the late 90s, I wrote some basic,
Oh wow, I did
which,
too.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it was a great language to get your feet wet. Honestly, I think
Hmm.
they should sort
Yeah,
of bring it back for kids or something like that as a way to learn.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I did some basic. I've, dabbled with all the things that we all dabbled with, like Rust and Python and,
Hmm.
things like that. But JavaScript's the only one that I feel like I can
Oh,
speak as well as English.
oh, I love it. Like I feel the same way too. Like no matter how I dabble, if I want to get things done, I just come. Just give me JavaScript anytime, any day. Let me just do this.
Yeah,
Like I can think in JavaScript. I just don't. It's at this point it's almost like like second nature to me right now. But yeah, I'm glad you
yeah,
feel that way because a lot of people and JavaScript is this, JavaScript is that, but I still love it with everything
yeah.
it
I still
has.
love
Right?
it.
Yeah, it's
I
just
still love it.
amazing. Hmm.
I mean, I guess I should say, nowadays I write in TypeScript, but
Oh,
uh,
oh.
so there's a slight variation on the theme
Hmm.
there, but yeah, and something about like the old school JavaScript I miss too. Like types are definitely great,
Hmm.
but something that I do think is missing. This isn't really on the topic of FormKit, I
Yeah, for
suppose, but
sure. Go ahead, go for it.
um, but I do miss the fact that everything has to go through all these build steps nowadays.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that that's providing a lot of value, but you do take on a tremendous amount of maintenance overhead, just even as a regular developer, when you've
Hmm.
got layers and layers and layers of build chain into your workflow.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I think it'd be really neat to see sort of a resurgence of actual JavaScript again at some point,
Yeah.
where people are using things in the browser. That's sort of like what Arrow is intending to do. I just
Hmm.
saw Rich Harris recently talking about,
Yeah.
moving to JS Doc, and that
Yes.
sparked something inside of me of like, man, there
Yes.
was a lot of benefit in that simpler time.
Yeah. I still use JS docs. I am I don't I don't. So I've used typed languages before, but they just the first of all, for me, I have different angles to come at TypeScript because at first, right now, people just type everything, right? And that's not really the idea. Like, not everything should be typed, but we have too many types, too many interfaces, and the confusion, right? Because most people new to JavaScript might not know that you can't just copy TypeScript and just paste it in a file and it runs, right? There's that
Right.
compilation step, right? Which is intrinsic because of course you know that because you've been doing this for a while. But a newbie will be like, okay, yeah, this looks like JavaScript, right? Let's just copy it and then. So there's just this confusion, and I've seen people don't even know which part is JavaScript normal, which part is TypeScript. So I don't really have
Yep.
a lot of problem writing just JavaScript with JS docs here and there, and because VS Code can let TypeScript understand JS docs syntax. So I feel at that point are kind of good for now. We've been having this all heated argument. It's been
Yeah. Right.
it's been really crazy on the internet, but I feel you can write the way you choose to write on the web because I think Webpack is still written in JavaScript, right? And Svelte is going back to JavaScript. And I did see a tweet where they did a benchmark. There are some certain codes that when you write it in just JavaScript, it works more better. It's more performant than doing it in JavaScript, TypeScript, and the transform, right? So all those stuff it's in there. I feel maybe TypeScript is for library authors and stuff, but for user-facing code, you might get away not really having to mess with TypeScript. And some TypeScript codes could be really scary. Really, it could be scary to look at. Yeah,
Types can get scary. I mean, I
yeah,
will say, I think for your average
hmm,
software engineer who's using, like, if you're using Vue,
yeah,
there's almost no reason not to use the typed version,
hmm,
to use TypeScript in your files because you basically just write JavaScript. There's
exactly.
very little work that you have to do to get the benefits of typing.
Yeah,
Now, Evan, you on the other hand, who wrote Vue,
hmm,
had to spend an enormous amount of time on some
exactly.
very complex types in order to get that to work.
Yep.
Um, and I know even from my own experience creating some of these open source libraries, TypeScript's been a benefit there for sure.
Mhm.
Anytime I go to refactor something, just being able to change some a variable in one place and it lights up everywhere that's going to break basically
Hmm.
is definitely a benefit. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we should all be striving for simplicity as engineers.
Yeah,
So
definitely. So I'm really rooting for the TC39 proposal to get type syntax into JavaScript. I feel it will make our lives a little bit easier in the sense that okay, yes, this is valid JavaScript, right? So there's little so of course TypeScript is going to handle all the actual type hinting and type checking, but that's just going to hint. So I'm really excited about that really. So maybe
yeah,
that will get me to because
yeah,
I
that
like
could
my
be exciting.
.js file. Yeah, I like my .js file. I don't want to change it for anything. Yeah. So this is for some reason TypeScript found a way into a Formkit talk. No problem. So let's talk about forms really. Like what is it about form? Because you mentioned you first of you wrote a form for Vue formulate, right? Like I know that most of the web is all about forms, right? Like on Twitter, it's just one form to the other, right? Everything is just form. So
That's right.
why yeah, so what is it about form that excites you enough to want to create a form framework? And also what is a form framework? Because I think this is the first time I'm hearing that okay, this is a form framework. So yeah,
Yeah.
so let's talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll clarify there. There's nothing exciting about forms, which is exactly why I started doing this, because they're fundamentally a painful thing.
That is
And so,
true.
really, people sometimes scratch their own itch, so to speak, because they're
Mhm.
excited about what they're building.
Yeah.
And in this case, there was nothing like initially particularly exciting about doing this because I just needed to solve all of the pain and anguish that I was going through.
Hmm.
Um, so I wouldn't say I'm some, like I'm not like some enlightened individual that's figured out how to love forms. I've just figured out how to make it less painful to create these forms. And you're right. The other unique thing I would say about Formkit here is the idea of a form framework.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we're the first people to put that label on there, but I do stand behind it.
Mhm.
The sort of the concept of a framework is something that it helps you build whatever the thing is that you're going to build and provides you with
Mhm.
all of the layers of the stack that you need in order to do that. And, we've had frameworks all over the place. Like you could call, like Laravel, you could call a framework on the
Mhm.
back end, and it's going to do all of the things from your ORM all the way up to your view. And then, on the front end, you've got things that basically handle that portion of the stack.
Mhm.
But what's interesting is that, at least in my experience, building for agencies, because I've done a lot of agency work, you end up writing, I don't know, I would say as much as 85% of the code can end up being the forms, especially on
Mhm.
these
That's
larger
true.
apps. You're building an app that's doing some kind of complex admin system or something like that. I mean, nothing happens on the web without forms. They're
Yeah.
so fundamentally important. And so, like one hurdle that people sort of need to get over when they're thinking about the concept of a form framework is the idea that forms are fundamentally easy.
They're not.
That's They're not. They're just not.
Yeah.
They're not easy. And they are easy when it's a login form and you've got two
Yeah.
inputs and you're sending some simple information back and forth.
Mm.
But once it starts scaling much further beyond that, it really does get pretty painful. And so the Formkit concept is, well, can we figure out a way to represent the complexity that a form has in a comprehensive system? So, like, what is the domain space of a form?
Yeah.
And on one hand, it's one to one with a form or with a UI framework like Vue or React, in the sense that those libraries are capable of producing everything that's needed in your form. But those are almost like primitives. Like it's almost like you're dealing with like the Vue is a primitive in order to produce all of the complexity that's in a form. Like technically you can do it. It just takes a ton of work. So, like a really simple example is if you have a component that is like an address component and you want to use that address component in a larger form, somehow you need to wire up all of the IO for everything that goes inside of there. And at first it's like, okay, well, I'll just create a V model for
Yeah.
the values that are down inside of there and push those up and down. But it doesn't take very long before you realize that's only one of the channels of data that you need to send back and forth. There's validation like messages, there's backend
Mm-hmm.
errors,
Yes.
there's potentially like being able to communicate the value of that with a dependent field. So when something inside your address changes, something outside, and the higher order component changes. There's
Yeah.
all of this complexity around it. And
Mm.
so FormKit's primary value is trying to solve that problem comprehensively in a structured way. And then, secondarily, it does a lot of other beneficial things for you, like provide easy validation, provide all your labels and ARIA attributes and things like
Oh,
that.
wow. Also accessibility in there. I like it. So
Yes.
I feel most people, the forms that they might have built might be a little bit simplistic because you get to see this sort of login forms or sign up forms where they don't really care about giving you good errors because it's a form, right?
Right.
We have the form, a method, no, the action, let's just submit it. Whatever happens, we just throw it into the ether. If the user is good or not, we don't care because they can always come back to the state. But if you really want to care about the user experience of like working in a form, you have to put in more thought and more care. So from what you've described, really, I think I'm really interested to like see how FormKit really solve that from like a simple form and build all the way up to like advanced use cases or stuff like
Yeah.
that, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you can
Okay.
share my screen whenever you want, and
Yes.
well, we can start looking at some stuff.
Yeah, let's start looking at some stuff because I'm interested. Like, I want to look into adopting it for myself because, like you say, forms can be hard. And if FormKit's going to make my life easy, I'll take it.
They can absolutely be hard.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just jump over to this playground, and this is on the FormKit docs, and it is just a really easy way to kind of get an idea for what's going
Mm-hmm.
on. It's a little bit like the single file component website from Vue, if you've ever seen
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
sfc.vuejs.org. A
Yeah.
little bit like that, but geared toward this.
Something.
So here's a Vue component, right? It's just a playground.vue file, and as you can see here, this is a text input in Formkit. And one of the unique things about Formkit is every single input type is represented in the library already. And we
Okay.
ship the DOM for it. And this is a really fundamental difference from almost everything else that's out there right now, is the
Okay.
fact that we actually ship the DOM elements.
Mm.
Um, and we're doing that because we want to get the accessibility right.
Okay.
So, this is in opposition to something like headless UI, or some of these other sort of renderless ones,
Mm-hmm.
where you as the developer are required to provide the actual inputs or provide the labels or provide things like that.
Okay.
We don't want you to have to do any of that, because the chances, like you said, most people, even on a simple form,
Yeah.
just kind of think it doesn't matter that much, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to skip over those steps.
Yeah. Of
we don't want
course.
anybody we don't want anybody to skip over those steps. So
Yeah.
if you take a look here at the rendered output, here's what you're getting with a type text.
Mm-hmm.
You get this input on the inside here with like an aria described by. You get a generated label here, and then if I were to, and down here in my help text, you can see that this has described by help input 0. This is help input 0.
Mm-hmm.
This gets the for attribute. And then we're putting on here a whole bunch of additional like helpful
Yeah.
data attributes. So if you're using semantic styles, you can key your styles off of those.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a Tailwind user, and this is the
Yes.
big challenge, Tailwind requires their users to be able to touch every single DOM element,
Yeah.
right, in order to be
That
able
is
to add
true.
classes. That is true. And I
Mm-hmm.
and I think this is one of the primary reasons that libraries are not shipping DOM, because there's not a good way to do this.
Yeah.
There's not a good way to tell somebody, hey, you can come into my data structure and literally access every single DOM element.
Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time trying to solve that problem. And every single DOM element in Formkit is addressable with classes. So whatever they are, you can see here, semantically, it's like Formkit outer, Formkit wrapper, Formkit label, inner, input, help. So I could, for example, just say like help class,
Oh.
and I could put whatever I want on here. And
Wow.
any of these are all called sections. So I could say, foo, and you'll see it renders over here, and I'm
Mm.
able to address those. And if I want to get rid of whatever's in my line here, I can actually say like, reset with a $sign, and it'll blast away any of the existing classes that are there.
That's smart.
I can write these globally. So if I want to have the same styles across the board, there's
Mm-hmm.
a way to easily have the same styles across the board. And we actually even ship like a Tailwind theme,
Cool.
where you can see it has all of the
Yeah.
same styles that are required, but with Tailwind styles. And as you can see, the way that that's implemented is we basically ship um, a configuration which is editable by anyone that allows you to modify what classes get output. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
really, that's where the Formkit story starts, is at an individual input level.
Mm.
And then it sort of works up from there. So here we go. That's a type text. But then in order to change that, like if I want a text area, obviously all I need to do here is say text area. And this is another benefit, is that we're smoothing out sort of the inconsistencies that exist in HTML. So in HTML,
Yeah.
you don't have an input type text area,
Of course. Yes, you have
but
to
we
get
do.
it. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
and
good.
and so there's basically no learning curve at this point, because every single HTML element is addressable in the same way. So like if I want to select, I just get a select. If I want radio, I get a radio. But it does get sort of complicated when you do things like, okay, I want a checkbox. Okay, well there's my checkbox, and that makes sense, and I can make that work. And you can see the rendered output here includes even like an SVG, which you can very easily override, because styling checkboxes is a complete pain.
That is
So we
true.
sort of try to handle that kind of stuff for
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
Um, but you can also come in here and just say, okay, well, my options here is like, apple and orange.
Okay.
And now you get a completely different rendered output. And if you take a look at what's happening here, you've actually got a field set now with a legend, which is the help text, and you've got a semantic list of the options that are available, and the rendered output looks something like this. Let me get rid of this thing. Um, and so now you actually have like a fully accessible checkbox. And this is what it, like, people don't realize this is what it takes to do proper checkboxes. It takes an absurd amount of boilerplate code in
All right.
order to do it well. You really need to be, I mean, you don't, it's not the only way to do it, but the right way, one of the best ways to do it is to stick your checkboxes inside of a field set if they're semantically related in some way. So that way the screen reader is able to understand what is inside of there, as well as things like, you know, using a legend on that field set. Half half of developers don't even know that legend is an HTML
Yeah.
an
So, oh my.
HTML element to begin with.
Yeah. Of course.
Um, yeah, so that's, you know, that's sort of the basics. And then you can do things like add validation. So you can do that by just adding validation prop. And
Okay.
there's a whole big fat set of rules that you can use. Let me pull up the docs here. So we take a look here at the validation, and there's, you know, a lot of these validation rules. So for example, I could just say something as simple as required, and that'll add a required one to this. So if I uncheck it, you know, this input is required. We call this
Oh, okay.
flavors. Okay, and then I could say I can use a pipe, sort of like in Laravel, and I could say, you know, I want a minimum of two of these. And then if I have one checked, you know, you can't have fewer than two flavors.
Yeah. Human readable messages. I like it.
Right. And of course, adding validation messages in line
Mm-hmm.
takes a whole bunch of work, including a bunch of accessibility. So, for example, here we've had to apply IDs on it. And then if you go look at the actual input up here, you'll see that these get, I don't know, somewhere inside of here, they get ARIA described by
Yeah.
slapped onto them.
Okay.
And this works like, you know, if I were to flip this back over to a text input, and I could say change this to length of two, I would get, you know, the same kind of things. And
Uh,
all of it is relatively easy to customize. So I can do validation, visibility, for example, and I have different options. I can say I want them live, or I want them on submit,
mm-hmm.
or I want them on blur, which is the default. So by default, you don't see them, but as soon as you blur away, you see them. And of course, if you've ever written large forms, trying to do this in a repeatable, composable way is obviously
Yep.
just, it just becomes a major pain.
Yes, it
Um,
does.
yeah. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing that we do is we make sure that we ship good
Mm-hmm.
language support.
Yeah.
So all of the messages that come out of Formkit always have full language support, and that's sort of like a guarantee. So, you know, because that's another area that people skip is
Of
at the end of the
course.
day, this needs to be written well for our end users, and that means that we need to provide appropriate stuff for them. So, you know, I don't know. Let's import some French here. We get some French and do locales, and we're going to provide French. Okay, and you can configure this globally, of course. Actually, sure, I'll do that. I'll just change my locale here to French, and now we get French
Oh,
messages instead.
wow.
So not a lot you have to do as an individual in order to get that kind of support.
Mm-hmm.
But it comes all out of the box for every single one of those messages.
Uh,
And that's obviously thanks to a lot of people that have contributed their languages.
yeah, that's a whole lot, really, because you know, oftentimes when I think about I18N, I feel like it's really hard to really get it right for a bunch of things, right? And that's why most
It's
people
really
skip
hard.
it, right? Like because you're like,
Yes.
yeah, I'm just going to assume, right, that they can read English. If they can't,
Yes.
use Google Translate or something. But if you really want a good global experience, you need to consider all this stuff, and that's why you take help from things like this, like Formkit, that just gives you all this and take the pain away. Because it is a pain if you have to write that yourself every time,
It's a
right?
huge pain.
Yeah,
And
it's difficult,
probably what you'll do is you'll skip it
of
and
course.
you'll come up with like one or two validation messages that
Mm-hmm.
cover sort of everything. So you'll come up with messages like this field is invalid, and
Mm-hmm.
then you'll go get that translated into a bunch of languages. But you
Yes.
won't carry the nuance that you would
Mm-hmm.
if you were just making the form in English or whatever your mother tongue is. You won't carry that nuance through to your entire form, and that's a disservice in the end to your end
Yeah,
users. So
yeah, it is.
yeah, it's really important that we had that solved, and it was more than just like enabling I18N. We wanted to actually make sure that those messages all got shipped.
I
Um,
like it. So one quick thing I noticed is that
mhm.
unlike most, so Formkit is sort of like a UI library, right? But you don't ship
Sort of, yeah.
individual, yeah, you don't ship individual components like you said, right? Like the text area, all that. You ship form kits that you get to use the type to actually know which DOM element to put in there. So you're saying that if I have like more forms, they're all going to be called form kits, right? Like
Yep,
on the form kit components.
that's
Interesting.
right. Yep,
Including the
it's
buttons.
yep. If you want a button here,
Mm,
let's just do a button,
interesting.
and there you go.
Mm,
Yeah, so these ship. We ship every single HTML element that
mm,
is formulated
okay.
in Formkit core in the open source library. And then we don't ship anything that is sort of like, we call it synthetic, but basically something that is non-native. So,
Yeah.
like a drop down, for example, where that drop down is actually a rendered div with
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff. We don't ship any of those in the open source library. We make it very easy for people to write them, but that's our current plan for how to support the library. Is we're selling like our version of
Yeah.
those
Sure.
as a way to try to fund this crazy idea.
Mm-hmm.
But you can basically import, like you could import a Vuetify component and have it wired up in a matter of minutes.
Oh,
It's not hard
oh,
at all.
interesting.
And in that case, you would have it imported. You would get to pick the name, so you could have it be like, Vuetify foo, and then you would still use the same FormKit component in order to mount and build those. And there's a ton of benefits of doing that. One of the biggest is that you get this like consistent prop API
Yeah.
across all of your inputs. You don't have to remember all of the different component names and the way that they're structured.
Okay.
And you get the benefit of basically getting the sand, even if you're going to use something like Vuetify. Well, I don't know if Vuetify does. I think, yeah, Vuetify does have a way to set a message on it, but a lot of them don't. That's not really what they do. And so you can get the benefit of, having the third party input loaded, but still get like all of the semantic labeling and the error messages and everything like that all built into it.
Amazing.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but that's just sort of like how the inputs work,
Mm-hmm.
very high level.
Okay.
The the thing that I think is probably the most important and the most interesting is the concept of the architecture that's under the hood.
Okay.
So if you think about the way that a form works, forms are a bunch of inputs and they're dispersed inside of this tree that we call the DOM.
Yeah.
And you don't really know where they show up inside of there. They could be, 5 layers deep inside of HTML, or they could be much deeper. And fundamentally, that's why forms get really complicated when you're building them with a reactive framework like React or Vue, is because we've consolidated the concept of a component into basically the DOM that represents that concept. But the components inside of a form are not necessarily conforming to that. So like you might have something that groups two things next to each other in your UI library, right? Like one thing next to another.
Yeah.
And you want to wrap two inputs in your form inside of that component
Mm-hmm.
because you want some styling that it's done there or something like that.
Yeah.
As soon as you do that, you're going to lose your two-way binding through that component chain.
Yes.
And so there's some other layer of architecture that we think is required in order to make large scalable forms really useful. And so that's why we have this entire concept of a node. And so behind every input in Formkit is basically this little object that holds the state of that input. It holds its state relative to the other things that are inside of the form. So like who its parent is, what children it has, what
Mm-hmm.
its validation state is, anything, all of the props that have been passed through, everything that's important about that thing. And that is actually just different than the component itself. Now, when you create like a text input, it creates one of these nodes automatically for you under the hood. But they are fundamentally different things. And they're always hierarchical because forms are always hierarchical. There's
Mm-hmm.
always a form at the top of the tree and then
Yeah.
a bunch of inputs that go underneath it. And so when you start using Formkit, we self-organize your form for you in that structure. So let me give you an example here. So here I can just say, Formkit type form, and I'll just wrap this guy inside of here. All right. What's going on with that button? I
Yeah.
don't know why this. Oh, it's because it's French.
Yes, we're still in French. Yeah, I know. We're speaking French today.
Do you speak French?
No, I'm currently learning Spanish, so my French is no good at all.
All right.
Yes.
I don't want any of this Tailwind stuff anymore. Get out of here,
Okay.
Tailwind.
Yeah. Bye bye, Tailwind.
Bye bye, Tailwind. Okay. We don't need options anymore. We don't need any of this stuff. Okay. So here's a really basic form. I've got my form here, and I've got this input inside of here. Now, typically in Vue, you would do something like vmodel on here, and
Yep.
then you would pass in a ref. You can do that with Formkit. It's fine. But you totally don't need to because it self-organizes itself. So if I just destructure here the value of that input, this input is the form. You can do this with any input in Formkit. I'm just
Okay.
going to destructure the value out, and I'm going to show you what's inside of it.
Hmm.
And here you go. There's nothing inside of it. And as soon as I start typing, you can see it's automatically collecting all of the values of my form are getting collected by
Oh,
this. And there was no wiring that was required in order to do that. So if
that's
I add a
interesting.
name here, flavors, now I've got something that's perhaps useful. But I could say, let's say a checkbox here, and this is, I don't know, terms. Do you accept the terms?
No, I don't.
And then my name here is terms, something like this. And now
Mhm.
you can see I'm collecting all of the values for my form automatically. But this works at any depth. And this is sort of where things
Oh,
start to
really?
get magical. So, I could create something like flavors.view, and I'm just going to pull this guy out of here. I don't want him for some reason. I want him inside of here.
Mhm.
Now I'm doing nothing different, except I'm just going to import my component. Import
Flavors.
flavors from flavors.view, and then I'll just use it down here. Okay, so you'd expect it to render exactly the same, but I still get all of that binding automatically. There's
Okay.
no props being passed down. There's no data being pulled up. It automatically self-organized into a tree that I was able to, and these things were automatically able to communicate with each other. This gets
Mhm.
really valuable once you go any further than this. So for example, if I want to get the state of my form here, so it's nice to know my value, but I also want to know what the state of my form is. So let me get that. And here you can see all kinds of information about this form
Mm-hmm.
automatically. I've got things like, is my form complete? Is it dirty, submitted, so on and so forth.
Mm.
And this starts to really matter. Let's take a look at just valid, for example. So I'm going to just get state.valid, and we'll just output this. Okay, right now it says that my form is not valid. How does it know that? Well, it knows that because the validation of my flavor says it's required and has to be a length of 2.
Yeah.
And all of that information is automatically flowing up to my form, and it
Mm.
knows that about the entire thing. So as soon as I start typing, you can see my validity flips to true, and now it knows that my entire form is valid.
Yeah.
So
And
I could
then
do things. Yeah,
mm,
you can do things with that. Like you could take that validity, you could disable your submit button for it
mm-hmm.
automatically. You can do all kinds of interesting things with it. Um, one thing that we do with it, for example, is if you have a submit handle on here, which you probably will,
Yeah, you will.
and we're going to just do something like this. I can get all the data from my form automatically flows into my submit handler. And we clone this data before we hand it to you. So if you want to modify it before you send it to the backend, you can do that. And it's not like a V model where it's going to screw your form up. It's
Yeah.
automatically decoupled already. And let's just say we'll just create a fake API here,
Mm-hmm. There's some timeout stuff. Yeah.
something like 2000 seconds. Did I screw something up there?
Which one
That should
else?
work, right?
Mm, is it?
Function submit
Yeah.
handler, and we'll just put that on there. Okay. So now when I come in here and I try to submit my form, it knows that my form's not complete. It automatically blocked that for me. And it can know that again at any depth. So if this was an address component and it was nested 30 layers deep, it would automatically recognize that, hey, there's something going on there. And we don't need that thing.
Yeah.
Um, when I fill this out and I submit, we automatically can do things like a loading state
Wow.
while it's there. And you'll notice that even though this component is deeper than where my form is, it automatically got disabled and went into a loading state. And that's because my form can communicate directly to its children. And it can actually do that at multiple depths.
Mm.
So how much time we got here? What time are you wrapping up?
Yeah, we still have 23 minutes, so I guess we're good. Now this is quite interesting because you most frameworks or library would not want to have opinions, but I see you have quite a lot of opinions already in terms of loading states, the error messaging, and those are like smart defaults that really make for good conventions. So you just take care of the lower bases. So you just get and the whole value and states all being reactive. That's just crazy. I don't know how you're doing that under the rule, but that's insane and I love it. Like you don't need to worry about the V model. Like we don't even have any state of ours. We're just using the states from Formkit, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And
That's
and I think
amazing.
that's actually really, really important.
Mhm.
Well, two things are important there. One, opinions are important,
Yes,
and the reason they're important in this particular case is because it's so tremendously easy to screw up forms, and you screw them up usually because the work that it takes to do it the right way is painful, and so you take shortcuts.
that
I
is
mean,
true.
I don't even blame people. you just It's just so much work that you have shortcuts,
Yeah,
and because of that you end up like, I mean, how many times have you submitted a form and all the validation errors end up as a big blob at the bottom of the form,
I do know.
and then
Oh, at
you
the
have to
top.
go try, yeah, or at the top, and then you as the user have to be like, wait a second, what does that even apply to? Like, what is it even, which of these inputs is it even communicating to?
Yeah,
And
right.
it's incredibly frustrating.
I totally
And the
agree, really.
reason Yeah, and the reason that people are doing that is just because the level of effort that it takes in order to do that is ridiculous. Like, let's use this as an example here, okay? So here I can get the second argument that gets passed to my submit handler is the node.
Hmm.
So what I normally do in a submit handler is I put something like a try catch here,
Okay.
and when it inevitably errors,
Mm-hmm.
All my errors are going to pop in right here.
Okay.
And then this part's a little bit up to you because I obviously don't, we don't know the shape of the data that this error is going to be in. But
Yeah. The
if
server
it's like
errors, right?
Laravel or something like that, you know it's pretty easy to understand what the shape of the errors is. So I'm gonna get rid of this though because I don't actually have any errors to throw. And I'm gonna show you though how you would set an error. So what I could do here is just say node set errors, and I'm basically given. Let me pull this up. So here you can see you get local errors and child errors.
Okay.
So a local error would be an error that applies to my form itself. So, you know, the back end is unhappy. All right,
Very
that's our
unhappy.
error. So we're going to submit this, and now we're saying something about the form itself. The form is unhappy. But my
Mm.
second argument can talk to any of the nodes inside of my system. So if I target flavors, I can
Oh,
say something about flavors. So here's flavors, and we go by the name. So the name of the input here is flavors, and I can say that flavor is just gross.
okay.
All right. And you can see we set an error message directly on the input
That's
that had
beautiful.
the problem.
Mm.
Additionally, like another problem is, okay, fine, you set the error on there, but then as soon as somebody starts typing, you usually want the error to go away. Now, you don't always. Sometimes it's important to keep the error there. Like if it's a password message and it's like, hey,
Yeah.
you need to have a symbol, a number, a backslash, and 3 tick marks, you want to leave that on there. So there's a prop you can use to keep the error messages on there. But by default, you usually want this to go away as soon as you start typing. Since we are tracking the state of this thing, we can automatically make those decisions for you to try to give you the best, the best behavior possible.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, things like setting errors on your form from your backend sort of come for free. You get the ability to have that kind of addressing wherever you go.
Nice.
Um, yeah.
So that's so for the node or set errors or the child errors as well, you need to actually know the shape the errors is coming in because I see you actually like trying to pass it into like
Yes.
an array of strings. So that's up to the developer now to like make it so. But that's not even a really big problem because if you had to do it, you have to actually mess with your templates, right? Do some v if in there and all this other stuff being there. But it's
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
like it. Yeah, that makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense.
and that's a place where plugins can come into play. And so this
Okay.
is probably the sort of like the primary master feature of Formkit is that node hierarchy
Mhm.
also applies to plugins. This might
Oh.
be the most unique thing about it. But all of the features that you see right now, including the inputs themselves, the error messages, the validation, they're all actually just plugins.
Okay.
Even Vue is a plugin. Like the Vue renderer is a plugin for
Mm.
Formkit. So it's not
Mm.
it's not even like something that is implicit about it. You can take they're just unbelievably powerful.
Mm.
Let's get rid of all of this, for example, and like let's say we wanted to have let's see, change this to a text. What would a good plugin be? Something like this. Okay, we're gonna do is
It's right.
is
I
red.
like it. Yeah. Red is blue. Yeah.
Is
So,
red.
um,
Okay.
the styling for the button is it from Formkit's theme or something? Looks really
Yes,
good.
this one's coming from the Formkit theme. Yeah, so
Oh,
we ship
Genesis
one
theme.
default theme called Genesis.
Okay.
Um, we've got some other ones in the hopper right now, but
Okay.
that's our initial one. And you can
Okay.
disable that too. So like if you don't want the button, you can just turn the button off and provide your own submit button. There's
Hmm.
nothing magic about ours.
Okay, cool.
Um, okay, this is all that a Formkit plugin is. It's just a function that accepts a node. And then what's interesting about it is you can apply it anywhere. So I can apply it on any input, and I'll just do isRed right here. And the neat thing is that this will apply to the entire subtree automatically.
Yeah.
So it it is not only applying to the form, it's also applying to this guy, and it'll apply to any other ones that are underneath it. So if there's some piece of functionality that you want to add, you can just add it in a localized place, or you can come over here and you could just add plugins over here, and you could pass it in here, and it applied to all of them globally. If you want it to get, like to not go any deeper for some crazy reason, you can also do that.
Yeah.
So if I want to change something about my node, for example, I could say like node, and then I could tap into the hooks that exist on here and say, on every input, and this is a middleware pattern. So I'm going to get the value and I get next, and I can return my call to next with my value. And in this case, you'll see nothing happens because it's all flowing through here. But if I console log and pop this open, this is really tiny, isn't it?
Yeah.
All
Well.
right. So here you can see it's intercepting all of those requests to all of my inputs. I can say some interesting things about it. So I could say like, maybe I don't want to do this on the form itself. Maybe I only want to do this on the text input. So I could say, if the no props type is text, then I want to do this. And that works exactly like you would think it works. It's just looking at the type here. And if it's a text, then it applies this hook on here. But we could make some modifications. So let's add a dot. And now you'll see every time I type, I get a dot in there. And the cool thing is that this just automatically applied itself to all of my inputs inside of here without having to do any further action, because this plugin automatically cascades down into any depth.
Interesting.
So that's a very, very brief look at how plugins work. And probably the pièce de résistance here is the schema, which we got a lot of inputs and whatnot, and we've got some other cool things, like there's some Zod validation we just added, which is pretty neat. You can do that in addition to the validation that already exists. But we have this really unique thing called schema. And schema is a way to store your DOM structure and your form structure in a serializable format, a JSON serializable format in particular. And it turns out that we like it so much, we wrote all of our inputs this way. So under the hood, if you were to go look at what a Formkit input actually looks like, it's a big JSON block. They are not actually written as like Vue specific components. And there's a reason why. And the reason why is because we wanted to ship all of the DOM elements. Remember, we were talking earlier about, whoops, not that. My playground. Here we go. We were talking earlier about the fact that, like with Tailwind, you have to be able to get in and touch every single DOM element that gets rendered.
Yeah.
And we had the same problem in Vue Formulate. When we came out with Vue Formulate for Vue 2, we had this prop that would let you move the label from like the top to the bottom, or it would let you move a couple things around inside of there.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is, as soon as you ship any significant quantity of DOM, people want to change things about it. This is why libraries don't tackle this problem. They just don't. So we spent a lot of time and effort trying to solve that problem. For example, if we take a look here at the help text, it's rendered as a div element. Somebody out there is going to say to themselves, I don't want that to be a div. I don't know why they're going to say that, but they just are. They want it to be a span.
Yes.
Well, how would you do that? Well, we could use a slot,
Okay.
And we could override it with a slot, right? That would be the Vue way to do this, is we provide a named slot or a scope slot to override the help. You can do that with Formkit. The slots work. However, you then have to recreate the features of that section, right? Now, in
Yes.
this case, it's a very simple section. It's just a help, so it's pretty easy to output that. But on some of these, it's much more complicated. You know, like if my input tag obviously has a bunch of event listeners on it and all kinds of other stuff. So if I want to override that, it's going to take a lot of effort to try to build back all the features that were necessary. So in Formkit, because it's written with this serializable format under the hood, you can say sections schema, and then we can target the sections that we want to change. So in this case, I want to change the help section. And then we just provide an object that's going to override the existing schema on that location. Now, this will look like Greek because we haven't explained how schema works. But I can say that the L is a span, and bam, we just changed the DOM element that's underneath there.
Wow. That's
Very cool.
amazing. Yeah.
I can also say I'd like some different attributes on there, like how about data foobar is yes. Oops,
Yeah. The comma.
comma. And you can see we're getting these outputs automatically in here. And the amazing thing is I didn't have to do anything to recreate the functionality that went into creating this thing.
Wow.
So, like if this was a slot and I removed the help text, I would have to have an if statement, like a vif or something that would say
Okay.
like, oh, the help text is gone, so take away the DOM element. But I don't
Mm.
have to do that. So if I take away this, that whole area is gone. I didn't have to recreate any of the functionality. The functionality is still exactly the same.
That's
But
interesting.
it's a little better than that. It's a little better
Mm.
than that because we implemented basically a Turing complete programming language. Programming language is a little excessive, but set of expressions inside of this serializable format. So if I want to, for example, like read another piece of data, I can actually output interesting information here. For example, I could output like the value of my input in this case.
Oh.
And as I'm typing here, let me see if I can find this in this one.
Yeah.
Where's my
Shadows.
help? Yep, there you go. You can see data foobar, and it's getting the value applied to it automatically.
Wow.
And I did that just by using this $ format, which says like now this thing that you're typing in is available. So the schema lets you basically then compose entire forms in this JSON-like format. And this really matters. This matters because now you can store this in the database. You can cobble pieces and parts together. You can architect it however you want. You can intercept it. You can modify it. You can do all kinds of stuff because it's in this serializable format.
Mm.
But it doesn't mean that you've lost sort of the reactivity. So without spending too much time on it, it's worth explaining how this works. And you can render components, you can render Formkit inputs, and you can render any DOM element. So here you go. Here you can see a little bit about the reactivity. Let me open this up in the playground. Hopefully we can see this okay.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a component in Formkit called Formkit Schema where you can just pass in your own schema. So again, every input is a schema under the hood, but you can also choose to interact with it this way. And a lot of people really, really like this feature because it lets them store their databases, or sorry, their forms in their database and then make modifications in real time without having to redeploy their
Mm.
entire application.
Yeah, that's really smart.
Um, yeah, so here you can see the basic structure is that you have an object like this, and they all either start with $EL or $CMP, which would be a component. And then there's a shorthand where you can do $Formkit.
Okay.
And that just tells which type of element it's gonna render. If it's an EL, then you can add adders, and that works as you would expect. If it's a component, then you can just pass props, and that's as you would expect. But it maintains reactivity with this expression format. So here you can see it's using this $sign. If a value starts with $sign, then it gets exposed to a little compiler that builds that expression into a render function in Vue. So in this case, it's $sign location, and it then goes and looks in the reactive data that's passed in, which is the second prop here, for whatever the evaluation of that is. So in this case, it's location world, and that makes sense. And then now you can see if I make a modification to location, it automatically updates the thing that's rendered.
Yeah.
Sort of unsurprising, but it works. It works how you would expect. And then these children can have any valid schema underneath the hood as well. So in this case, if I wanted to have another, I could have one here that's like an L. We'll make this one and another H1. Oh, that's crazy. Let's not do that. Let's do a span.
Yes, please.
And in this case, I'm going to say like price. Okay, price is undefined because it's not part of my data. So let me add it. Okay, so price here is going to be 10. All right, so now we've got a price. And instead of this being change location, I want it to be like add item. Okay, and then let's add some items. So here we've got an element, and this will just be a div, and the children is going to be item. And now we can write a full for loop here. So I'm going to say for item in items. And again, you notice that we're not referencing any of the variables explicitly, and that's because we want to allow this to get fully serialized. Now, items doesn't exist yet either, so I'm going to add that. I'm going to add items, and this will be first, second, third. And now we've got a full loop that's rendering here. And perhaps we want to know the price of each of these. So for each of these, our value is going to be the item. And then we know that the price of each of these is going to be like, I don't know, 10, something like that. Okay, so the price is 10 on each of these. And I guess we could just say price.
Yeah.
And that's pretty ugly, honestly.
Yes,
it's pretty
it
ugly.
It is.
$10. There we go. $10. At least let's put a space there. Let's not make this. What is this? All inside of an H1? Crazy.
Crazy stuff.
Let's make it a UL. Let's make these LIs. We'll take this outside of here and plop it down here somewhere. Okay. I'm feeling a little better about this now. Not a lot better, but a little better. This should probably be a div, so we at least get block styling. Okay. Now my price could be times my item's length. And now you see we've got an actual reactive expression. So this multiplication here looks a lot like JavaScript, but it's not. There's no eval going on. It's actually compiling this into a tiny little expression, and it's reactive. So if instead of this move, we say add, and we take our items, and we push another one, you can see that we're actually performing real operations here. And this is all something we can just go and plop in the database and reload anywhere in the world. So that's a brief look at how schemas work.
Cool stuff, really. I think they're really powerful.
Yeah.
And one thing I like about it, because I was already having a cringe for having multiple form kits in my templates. So with the schema now, I love it even more because it's all this object, right? Which is not really an object, it's like a DSL for defining your forms. And it's it's amazing. I love it. I think this is the way I'm definitely gonna write Formkit as.
Yeah, it is exactly that. It's a DSL specifically for writing well, it's intended to be used for writing forms, but really you can use it to write anything you want. Yeah.
Awesome. Sure thing. Thank you. Really,
There's
you've okay. Go on.
no, I was going to say there's
Mhm.
an infinite number of more things that we could talk about, but I think we're running out of time here. So
Yeah, we are like this is like really now I get why you call it a form framework because this can't be a library anymore, right? Because there's so much thoughts into the architecture and I think you have a lot of, the use cases and trying to really author forms the right way. I think you actually nailed it with all this, really. From the,
thanks.
yeah, I think you did a superb job. From the I-18 end, that one sold me already because I wouldn't do that, really. I'm just going to give you
Right?
all English, whether you like it or not.
That's
But yeah,
of course not. Who
that's
would?
a, yeah, and the accessibility, the validation,
There's
it's
there's
just too much.
icons. We didn't really talk about those, but it
Yeah.
ships with an icon library for doing things
Whew,
like this.
this is good.
The pro inputs are really cool.
Hmm.
Like the date picker. Again, I should probably stop talking here, but the date
Yeah.
picker makes me so excited because um,
Yeah, and we can't get date picker right. And don't tell me the browser because that one is definitely going to have definitely a lot of
oh, the one in the
inconsistency and
browser
all.
is terrible.
Yeah, so
The one in the browser is terrible.
yeah.
Yeah, this thing lets you basically like I'm hitting up and down and cycling
Mhm.
through all of the months that are available here.
Wow.
And it will do that with any format automatically, including the like native locales, like whatever locale is best where you live. It can automatically read and write to those values. So like in America, people do month, day, year like this,
Hmm.
which is why mine looks like that.
Yeah.
And you can see I can just cycle through all of the values here. Um,
Wow.
but I can say I want a long format, and now I'm getting like I can just start typing and it'll autocomplete, or I can hit up down, it'll cycle through the months. But it also knows every locale that's out there. So if I wanted to change the locale to be, I don't know, Italian, you can see that the format just changed, and now all the months are different,
Mhm.
and it can autocomplete all of these months. Um, yeah, it's
Yeah,
really, really cool stuff.
that's magic, really. I love it, really. Thank you so much because
Yeah.
this you've nailed form, like this is should be the form framework. So I guess you have plans to ship for other frameworks. Or are you currently shipping for other frameworks?
We're not shipping for other frameworks. There are some very poorly kept secrets about that's on the roadmap. Yeah.
Yeah. That's just it's amazing if you do because it's form is a universal thing regardless the framework. If you need to like really write robust form, you really need help. And I rather use something like Formkit that has been really thought through, is battle tested,
Yeah.
and I don't want to roll out my because I feel it takes all the boilerplates out of writing forms because I know for my validation messages and even for my loading state, I know always have to do this loading, you get to get your own state and you do the check, you put
Hmm.
the elements. So it's I feel all those are not even core to what you're trying to do, but they are just extras you need, right? To make it really look nice. So if HomeKit is handling that, I love it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We're doing our very best to handle that. Yeah. We have a super active Discord too,
Yeah.
and
Uh,
we give a lot of support in there. So it's a great place too for people to go when they're just trying to work through how to put these things together.
yeah, sure. So I'm going to definitely put that in the description. So for coming to the session, TKYT session, you can plug in anything. Of course, we know you do FormKit. Is there anything you want to just plug for this time? And also, where can we reach you and all that? So plug away, please.
I mean, Formkit's the main thing I want to plug. It's
Okay.
I'm we really want to see this thing get to the point where it's like sustainable. Because one of the big problems in open source is
Yeah.
that eventually creators burn
Mhm.
out and go away because they spend so much of their life their lifeblood, working on these open source packages. So we're trying to get it to the point where it can actually like, pay the bills.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can follow me on Twitter, JP Schroeder is my last name. And yeah, come hang out in the Formkit Discord.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be great to see people there.
Sure. Thank you so much, Justin. I am definitely
Yeah,
going to try Formkit. I think I love it already. So yeah, thank you for coming. And yes, thank you. I'm really looking
thank
forward
you.
to having the talk on anime because that's another thing that is just so crazy. Like you do amazing stuff. So probably we'll have another session where we talk about
Yeah,
auto
no, that'd
animes.
be really fun.
Yeah, it
That'd be really
will
fun.
be. All right. So thank you for your time, really.
All right, nice to meet you, Kevin.
Yeah, sure.
Bye.